Patrick. Thanks for the invitation to be here today. And I love Rotarians. I've had the opportunity to meet others, and my first large disaster after moving here was in Gatlinburg, and I was surprised to see the amount of work that the Rotarians there in Sevier County did in the aftermath of the wildfire. They did tremendous work out there. So my agency and my responsibilities are to prepare the state for disasters, prepare communities for disasters, and that's not just the TEMA teammates, just not my employees, but it's 95 county emergency management agencies. It's getting the enterprise and state government aligned so that we have effective plans and effective responses. And we do that primarily through legally required plans. So the Tennessee Emergency Management Plan, or the TEMA, is our core document on how we coordinate resources. And Jim Schulman and I knew each other from his previous role because he would have employees who are assigned as liaisons so that we can wield resources effectively, preparing for disasters and then responding to and coordinating recovery from them. Part of what we do also is to try to mitigate future effects of disasters. And we have a lot of disasters here, especially over the last 9 years. So I don't know if that ties into my arrival or not. But for context, we've had more than 20 federally declared major disasters since I've been the director. And for context, in the 1980s, there were 3. So those figures get normed for inflation, like they keep adjusting the figures. So 3 major disasters in the whole of the 1980s, and we've had 3 in the last 15 months, I think, correct? So the op tempo, the frequency of disasters is empirically increasing. And you see that through the damage from Hurricane, Tropical Storm Helene, the tornadoes, flash flooding, and river flooding in West Tennessee and Middle Tennessee last month. And so we work with communities, though, to help prepare. And we don't talk about the preparedness and mitigation enough. I don't think it's not very sexy. It's hard to talk about conceptual things, and planning meetings are not very exciting. Sitting down and people having discussions about concepts and reviewing what resources available, those things aren't exciting. They don't generate the news. But that investment, those things that we do on days, I would say like today, but there's still storms going on.
Yeah.
On days that are clear, and those investments that we do, those roots that we set, those foundations we build, they don't gain the headlines, but you can see the fruit of those investments on days of disaster. And I'll tell you, even when you're ostensibly ready, even when you do everything right, you're still gonna miss things. There will still be critics who will be out there who will be right about some things that you miss, or you don't get perfect, or that you haven't scaled fast enough to meet certain demands. And investing in having enough capability to respond to every contingency is difficult. And so that's why we're always trying to fine tune what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we go in Tennessee, there's one standard accrediting body, the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, EMAP, and we make sure that we're accredited via those standards. We participate broadly with that system, so I find it's effective to have our teammates, our public servants here in Tennessee, go and be evaluators and learn best practices and see what other cities and states and organizations are doing, and bring those back to us so that we can continue to improve. So Tennessee, we are the volunteer state. We also send more resources via EMAC, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which is state-to-state mutual aid that was born here in the southeastern United States in the 1980s when they were only having 3 disasters in a decade. But we use that to live the volunteer spirit. So going back to Hurricane Harvey in 2017, up through flooding in Texas last year, we send teams of Tennesseans to represent us and to serve. And there's a selfish benefit to that, is the best way to learn and build teams and build experience is by doing things in real world disasters. And I would much rather our folks learn how to do hard things and build camaraderie and skills on someone else's disaster. And I get pushback sometimes. 2 weeks before Tropical Storm Helene, the week before Hurricane Tropical Storm Helene, folks who are on some of these teams, their leadership, asked to meet with me. And part of the pushback was we were using these teams that we were developing, incident management teams that help augment incident commanders locally or or local emergency operations centers, swift water rescue teams. We weren't using them very much in Tennessee. We were sending them abroad. And it requires, because it's not just TEMA employees that are doing this, it's local fire departments, local police departments, it's other state agencies that send personnel and give personnel. And they weren't seeing a return on investment. And the thing about disasters is, God willing, we don't ever use them, right? So God willing, there's never a return on investment, right? In the way that we're trying to build and prepare for. But we were sending them outside of Tennessee an awful lot. And then when Helene hit, we had an absolute need for every capability that we built for incident management. And in fact, I wish we had built more. So that when their worst day happened, and for many of them it was their worst day in Carter, Comp, Washington, Unicoi, and Johnson counties, pretty hard times. And we were able to send incident management teams that we had, over the last 8 years, invested in building, and just the week before, jurisdictions were questioning whether it was a wise use of their time. So thank God we had, and thank God they were patient enough to not ask years ago, and waited until the week before. And now I can tell this story, and I will for years, to justify continued investment and expansion in building cross-jurisdictional, cross-departmental, cross-professional, like police and fire, and public works, and medical personnel, so that we can have the kinds of capabilities to send downrange to help. In the aftermath of Helene, there was lots of noise around what was happening and not happening. My agency asked people, as a reminder, proactively, don't go to the disaster scene, because roads are washed out, bridges are washed out, there's debris everywhere, there's hazardous chemicals. We had some concerns about other materials maybe having been released, and there's always disaster looking groups or disaster tourists who do nothing to help the situation. There's also, philosophically, I think the best way to help disaster survivors is by donating cash to reputable organizations. And that's because when someone has just lost their home, they don't need hand-me-down clothing. They might need it immediately, right, when they get to a shelter or when they get to where they're gonna live. But giving them the opportunity to buy something that they would actually like is better than forcing them to have something that we just happen to have on hand. And has anyone here ever volunteered to sort donated resources after a disaster? Jim has here in Hands on Nashville. That's right, you did 5 years ago. You have. So you've seen there's dirty clothing. The clothing that comes in tends to be unlaundered. It's not laundered and folded or hung in some nice way. It's something that needs to be processed. And if you have a flood event that takes out a broad part of your public water system, you don't really have the capability to launder the clothing and fold it and make it right. So cash is the best way to help. So my organization, though, knowing all those things and having broad disaster experience, asks people to, hey, stay out of the area. When these communities and when these community-based organizations need help, they will tell us what they need, and we will amplify that message. Well, that's a nuanced message. My organization put out a very blunt, stay out of the area, don't send your stuff kind of message. It's accurate, but so it was true, but it did not build friendship. And I did not approve the message. I didn't get to see it ahead of time because I think I was traveling up into those counties and connectivity was spotty. So, I come back and some of the most interesting social media posts and whatever we call nowadays that I've ever seen, and a lot of them I've saved just because with hindsight they've become funny. At the time they were acrimonious and blood pressure spiking. But we had to fine tune our message, right? Because nuance gets lost when stakes are high. And nuance is important, right? There's a lot of, we should have nuanced our message better, knowing that people are gonna get excited. But we also knew that we were going to have mountains of donations, and that the available warehouse space in that part of Tennessee, that had not flooded away, was going to be very limited. Because it's limited, it was limited on the 26th of September, 2024. And so immediately, because I had been a part of leadership in Tennessee, and had been to Bristol Motor Speedways and had met Jerry, but I did not have his phone number, immediately started thinking, we need lots of space to be able to manage the massive donations that will be pouring in. And you know, I have friends who were, their churches, we're sending 2 trucks right now. And I'm like, good Lord, you know better, please don't. But they were already on their way, they're so proud. And so we needed a place for all these things to go. And so we worked with all of those counties. We worked with Bristol Motor Speedways. We worked with so many nonprofit, we worked with any nonprofit organization that we knew ahead of time. And we set up a distribution and reception center at Bristol Motor Speedway. The scale of that operation was massive. At one point in time, we had 2,000 pallets of water stored under the grandstands. I think it's the Darrell Waltrip grandstands. They were stored under to get them out of the weather. And it was really impressive. And I will say, like, as I was hunting to try to get Jerry's phone number, I get a phone call from the governor's office to say, hey, Bristol Motor Speedway wants to help. I'm like, I'm trying to find Jerry's phone number. Oh, it's Jerry. So as I'm like thinking, my gosh, we gotta get them engaged. Like, we desperately need their help because you can't replicate land. You can't replicate space and accessibility, and lots of people go into and out of Bristol Motor Speedway. And I will just say, for 5 months, there's no way we could have done what we did without their help, without their generosity, and their willingness to step up and serve their community. And they did it in a tremendous way. And they don't get enough recognition, quite frankly, for the work. And then tremendous volunteer support from so many organizations, the United Way of Upper East Tennessee, the Holston chapter of Habitat for Humanity. I know Rotary Club stepped up in the area as well, but I'm not as familiar with what they were doing. But disasters, we build those relationships today when we're talking about disasters. We proactively go out there and make sure that we're trying to connect people. So a big part of what emergency managers do is convene. We have a convening authority. We have a reason to bring people together. And quite frankly, we serve a lot of food, right? Because it's amazing how much more people come together when you're serving a meal over a meeting. But in the aftermath of Helene, people stepped up in big ways. You know, Tennessee has a unique arrangement with Medicare. We're the only one in the nation. And when Governor Lee and Commissioner Healy from TDOT and myself came back, Commissioner McCord, some others, came back from the first visit on site there in Unicoi County, the bridge that was demolished in Irwin. As soon as we got on the ground, he convened a cabinet meeting, and he charged us all directly with thinking of innovative ways that we could help and be faster and not cause other problems in the future. So Stephen Smith is the director of TenCare, and as soon as we got off of that call, Stephen called and said, I think we can do something innovative with these Medicare savings dollars. So we were getting ready to draw down money. It had to have a nexus to helping Medicare eligible people. And so we had our teams look over it, and one of the big problems after disaster, even when it's federally declared, it's just the sheer cost. It is crushing burden for many jurisdictions. This disaster is many times their annual budget for almost all of these communities. And so the ability to raise that kind of fund, to take on debt, to pay the debt service on debt they're gonna have to take, I know it's crushing because we've had dozens of disasters under my tenure here, and I talked to the mayors and the finance managers and the county commissioners in these communities. So knowing that this was going to be orders of magnitude worse, we were very concerned at that moment about how these communities might be able to pay until they would get what we presumed would be FEMA assistance through public assistance grants. So FEMA grants for public assistance in the emergency management world as it currently is does not mean helping people or individuals. Like we would normally think of it as social service programs, welfare programs. In emergency management, public assistance is supporting jurisdictions, cities, counties, state, and utility districts, and certain eligible nonprofits. No businesses, no private sector, for-profit enterprises, those programs. But they have to take on a tremendous amount of debt ahead of time to pay people to remove debris, to pay contractors to remove debris, to start restoring infrastructure. And the water systems and the wastewater systems were significantly impacted, especially along the Nolechucky River. And we take for granted, all of us take for granted, that water is available, clean and safe drinking water. We think of it, we don't even think of it. We go to the tap and we're irritated if it doesn't work. And we don't think about the magnificent engineering and public works that make it happen. We don't think about it. There's 2 water treatment plants here producing millions of gallons of water for us to consume in Davidson County every single day. How many of you know that one of the water treatment plants in 2010, 15 years ago, 15 years and 3 days ago, went offline? You guys aware of that? So, in Davidson County during the Great Flood of 2010. If you're outside of Davidson County or National, by the way, don't call it the National Flood. It's 35 other counties flooded too, and they take it personally. Speaking from experience. But we take water for granted, and water infrastructure is expensive. It's lots of concrete, it's lots of excavation, it's geotechnical engineering, and most of our infrastructure in this nation is way beyond design basis. Like we design things to be there. We say they're gonna be there for 50 years, and then 100 years later, it's still what we're using. And so we're not keeping up, and we're not making those kinds of investments as we go along. But what we're able to do, Stephen called, we knew we needed a tie back to have a nexus to Medicare populations. So we're able to make a no interest loan for each of these communities that had water or wastewater treatment needs and debris removal needs. Now, we ended up doing at the state most of the debris removal because the law gives us the ability to claim concurrent jurisdiction. And so we have now removed 3.3 million cubic yards of debris, either from waterways or from rights of way. That's if you want to visualize that, that's 3.3 million washing machines of reduced debris. So that's chipped woody debris, that's compressed household goods, recycled household goods. It's broken down into components. So, and it's expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars. At the time, actually, when we first were doing our initial debris estimates, we thought it was going to be $1 billion. So, thankfully, it's come in much less than that. Not much less. It's come in less than that. But Unicoi County and the town of Irwin can't afford $100 million to remove debris. They can't afford, in their funds, $20 million to make immediate repairs to some of the things. They don't have that cash on hand. They don't have access to that kind of debt market that quickly. And so the HEAL program, Director Smith, and then his team and the FNA, the Finance and Administration team, and my team put together a program where 10 days later we were moving money into these jurisdictions so they can pay for reestablishing their water and wastewater system. Because FEMA grants will come back. And we're hoping for a higher cost share. Given the national discussions, I'm not sure that we're gonna get that, but 75%. And when you have a disaster, there's always skin in the game. There's very few times do you see the federal government will pay the full freight on it. And so 75% gets reimbursed. Typically, historically in the state of Tennessee, we pay half of that non-federal share. So that 25% we divide it. In Tennessee, TEMA will typically pay 12.5% of that. We'll divide it with 50-50. So we pay 12.5%, the jurisdiction pays 12.5%, and the federal government pays 75%. And I think skin in the game is important. I think jurisdictions having to pay something is important. But one of the things that happened subsequently in a special session that we had in January was that we made the decision to reduce the local contribution to the non-federal share to just 5% of the total cost. So the state gave us additional funds so that we'll pay 20% of that 25% for the disaster. And the net effect though is water systems and wastewater systems were able to come back online faster. They didn't have to figure out funding, because it's the same people that will be problem solving the engineering and the schematics who will then have to go and justify funding. And we were able to take some of that pressure off of them and help them get restored faster. And I'll say it's been incredibly popular with the leaders there. And they know when they're reimbursed by FEMA, they'll pay us back. And we don't quite know what we're gonna do with those funds when they come back, but we may just leave that for future disasters as a way to help relieve that immediate burden until reimbursements can happen. Or insurance proceeds can come in, because sometimes these things are insured too. And federal law requires that FEMA dollars be the dollars of last resort, so there can be no duplication of benefits. So whenever you hear complications in the news about FEMA or clawbacks, and if there's a duplication of benefit and it's discovered, whenever it's discovered, FEMA will go and grab that money back, take that funding back. And it's far more complicated than would seem on the surface. So people have insurance policies for things that aren't always apparent, or FEMA will say that people have insurance. But in the aftermath of the disaster, we have a weekly meeting with all 14 counties where we are able to talk about problems. So my FEMA counterpart, there's a federal coordinating officer that got assigned after the disaster. That guy I happen to have known from his time at the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. So he's works for FEMA and the FCO cadre. Daryl's been great. And Daryl and his team participate in this meeting. 14, it's usually 6 county mayors are there every Friday. Every other week, I try to do it in person. So I'll go to Upper East Tennessee, and we'll go and we'll check on the progress of debris removal. We'll check on the progress of infrastructure restoration. We'll talk about what their concerns are. And it provides a forum where they can tell us what their pain points are, what their frustrations are, so that we can solve them on a regular basis. And for me, it also serves the purpose that it collects all of them in one place, right? I'm not gonna get pelted by 100 queries, because they know they're gonna see me every Friday, without fail. They're gonna see me, hear from me. And so those issues that are real or enduring, or that they can't solve, or my staff can't solve easily, it gives them a forum to do it. But we've done a lot of innovative things to try to lean forward and help these communities. Quite frankly, they're kind of an extension of what we started after Gatlinburg and then the Waverly flood 3.5 years ago, where we stay engaged with the community at a very high level to make sure that things move along. When I drive around after the tornado from 5 years ago, the long track tornado that went from here to Cookville, especially the community of Baxter, I go through Baxter at least twice a year just to see what's being built back and what's not being built back. And I'm frustrated with lack of progress. I'm frustrated with what's been done or not done. And I know that I can keep a spotlight on areas that are problems by staying engaged. And so for each disaster here these last 5.5 years, I stay more and more engaged. My executive team stays more and more engaged. Where we would normally pass it off to our staff and let the staff and the community run it, we don't take anything for granted that if we can do something to help communities recover faster, more completely and better, that we're going to do it. And those are the things we're trying to do for every community that suffers disaster. We're also out there every day trying to make sure that their local plans are better and more complete, and that the local government invests in their emergency management program. So we've been pretty fortunate. Governor Haslam appointed me originally, and Governor Lee thankfully reappointed me 6 years ago, or retained me 6 years ago. But both of those gentlemen and their administrations invested in helping us have better readiness and resilience programs. And I'll tell you, one of the things that we were working on too is starting under the first Trump administration, was coming to fruition under the Biden administration, was something called the Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation Program, the STORM program. It was a revolving loan program to help small communities capitalize, have access to low interest debt, so that they could fund mitigation projects. So we have been working over the last couple of years to get staff on board, figure out, get the laws changed so that we could do this program, execute this program in Tennessee, and then have the cash set aside so that we can have our match for it. I don't know what the future of the STORM Act is going to be. It's one of those ones that's on hold through the IJA, EO, but by phasing it the way we did serendipitously, these folks that were going to work on STORM are working on the HEAL program, and they're working on the new Governor's Response and Recovery Fund. So in the special session, we also created a $100 million fund, not just for Helene, but for future disasters, to help meet those needs and expenses that aren't covered by insurance and aren't covered by the federal government, that the community thinks can help them better prepared. So that application period is open for eligible entities in those affected Helene jurisdictions until the 31st of May, and that's for folks that are farmers, small farmers, businesses, nonprofits that assist with Helene, the governments themselves, and I keep calling them foresters, but they're forest product producers, I guess, because one of the things that happened after Helene is a lot of topsoil was washed away from generational agricultural land, and there's no federal program to restore ag lands like this. Almost all the USDA programs are loans, and so we're trying to find a way, and some of this is agritourism, people go there for different things, and so we're trying to find ways to help restore the economy and the ability for people to continue to operate there, and forest products is one of them as well. So, but until you've been there and seen it, the sheer volume of silt that's deposited in places that have never, that used to be rocky, and then the places that are now rocky because all of the topsoil and ag land is washed away is pretty incredible. But we're doing everything we can to help those communities, and we're trying to help the communities in West Tennessee now that we were so significantly impacted by the tornadoes and flooding last month. But there are a lot of moving parts I don't think most people are aware of. You know, if you ask my mom who I work for, she probably still tells you that I work for FEMA. And I've never worked for FEMA ever, so I've always been a state guy.
You might be better off.
Maybe. You know, then the federal government can be a powerful partner, but you know, like I said, I'm a state guy, so I think states need to do more, and I appreciate the support that the General Assembly has given us to be able to support communities and Tennesseans after disaster, and we're going to continue to try to do that to the best that we can. I'm happy to answer questions. I think he was first, ma'am.
As a percentage, when these things happen, how many people are volunteers that help? And how do you recruit them quickly? You're telling people to stay away, but you do need manpower.
Yeah, lots of manpower. Yeah, so We try not to manage that at the state level necessarily. So we do have, there's an organization called VOADS, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And a lot of counties have their own VOAD, so it would be Cotton County VOAD. And then we have Tennessee VOAD, that's kind of an umbrella organization, and there's NVOAD, this is all confederations, right? They're not hierarchical necessarily. But we work with them that have a relationship in the community. The counties typically have that process, but we have, for the last year and a half now, had a position to help coordinate VOADs. So we do that through voluntary agency liaisons, so we have folks that'll help coordinate with the voluntary organizations. You know, there's a tremendous ad hoc or spontaneous volunteer spirit that happens after a disaster. We try to go with known organizations first, those that have some ability to organize, and you know, then communities will oftentimes have a volunteer reception center. So there's a process to take people who just want to show up and help, and then give them an assignment that they can help. So for instance, 22 years ago, I went and mucked out basements, and I just showed up at a volunteer reception center. They verified that I didn't have warrants, and then they gave me a shovel, a mop, and a garbage can, and sent me to help someone get filth out of their basement. And we have similar things happen here after a disaster.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
As kind of as individuals, what would you suggest that we could do to help prepare and be resilient ourselves after disasters?
So insurance is the first line of defense, and it is oftentimes when someone has paid off their mortgage, it is the first thing that they get rid of, and they should not. I would say also make sure you know your flood hazard, and you don't have to live in I won't ask because I don't want to know the answer to this question, but I would encourage you to have flood insurance. Flooding is the #1 hazard in our nation. It's the #1 hazard in Tennessee. It does more economic devastation than any other hazard we have. It kills more people other than anything but disease. So don't get rid of insurance when you paid off your house. I would say that's an important time to keep it. Yes, ma'am.
I have two parts. One is for insurance. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm gonna try to ask the question. The difference between flood surge and flooding, because my understanding is sometimes the insurance won't pay because it wasn't the usual flooding, it was something to do with storm surge. Is that accurate?
That is a coastal designation, so it's not really something that applies here.
The other thing is, my understanding is, and again, I know enough to be dangerous, that our legislators, and they're infinite wisdom, have passed a law that to allow developers to do away with floodplains. In other words, they can just fill it up with whatever, throw some concrete on there. And as somebody that took environmental science before probably most people had ever even heard of it 100 years ago, that really increases the risk of flooding when you do away with wetlands and a whole lot of other things.
Yeah,
So,
it is a wetland bill, not a floodplain bill, but
correct, but when you do away with wetlands,
Yeah.
you increase the risk of flooding. Would you agree with that? Because it is a
that is my
science-
concern.
Okay, it is a science thing out there. I'm not gonna argue science anymore, but, in any event, so do you have those conversations with the governor and people? Because sometimes, money gets passed around, it appears, otherwise why would they pass that? And I'm not trying to be political, but it just boggles my mind that
Yeah.
a state like Tennessee, as beautiful as we are, and when we're looking at people, and I've been in the hospital, I used to go to Unicoi County, my company had a contract with the hospital, and, the hospital was one of the few remaining small hospitals to serve rural areas and serve the poor. So, there's so many things that are impacted when you have that kind of flooding.
Yeah, so I'm gonna dovetail back to what individuals can do. Being engaged in your community zoning, paying attention to where you live, how they're zoning things, and what projects they're approving is so important. I live I live in Franklin, and I was paying attention to a development that I had concerns about how it might increase flood risk for people and homeowners up and downstream from a proposed project. And it did not comport with the planning documents that Franklin and Williamson County had put together. And the mayor and most of the aldermen and members of the zoning board looked at the floodplain documents, and they heard from people who had flooded in 2010, who had done things to mitigate future flood risk for themselves, who took it upon themselves to speak up. And leaders will listen to their citizens that communicate. And I would say, there's a lot of shrillness all around our world today. And I think, applying your communication, if you apply your four-way test as Rotarians to how you communicate, you can gain an audience that's receptive to hearing what you're trying to communicate. And I think that's an important way to do it too. But staying engaged in shaping your community, which Rotarians do. You guys you're interested in community service. And I think more Americans should try to engage in being engaged citizens in their communities, and have a say, and try to understand better how government works and how those decisions are made locally. And my agency was on the record about how we felt about that. And so,
Maybe one or two more questions.
Gentlemen in the back.
Yes, my concern is moral hazard. You mentioned people canceling their insurance, towns not being sometimes prepared. And I grew up already in a generation, I'm young enough that, I know there's big federal entities and big state entities, county entities that will take care of people, will help people in their time of need. And by the time that filters down to people like me, I'm like, well, there's a bunch of people who will help, or perhaps might help in a case of need. So maybe I just won't renew my insurance. I'm just, like you said, now you have a larger share, you got them funding to provide a larger share to townships and things in case of emergency. I'm just wondering if you consider that there might be some level of moral hazard where people become careless,
Always concerned about it. Yeah, because that is, there will be some of it. We won't squeeze out all of the moral hazard. We won't squeeze out all those people that make those decisions. But go visit or help volunteer. Go volunteer for the Red Cross and go see what a shelter looks like and how uncomfortable it is. Like, I slept in the dirt as a soldier, and I think that's probably more comfortable than staying at the Red Cross shelter. Because you're around people that you don't know, and they, from your broader community, not necessarily your neighborhood, not your church, not your fellow Rotarians. In no disaster program, none is intended to make someone whole, especially from the government. In fact, the law is pretty clear that it will not make someone whole, which you'll hear people, be pretty upset about. I can't believe they're only gonna give me $40,000. I lost everything, right? And that heartbreak is real. That realization is real. But insurance, savings, not living day to day, week to week, is an important thing.
So Kim and David, I think, are the other two.
So, Samaritan's Purse, Church of Grace, all that sort of thing, how does that? I'm sure you see the benefit of that in the individuals that are serviced by someone who comes, cuts trees, puts on roofs, that sort of thing. But how does that interface with the government?
Yeah, so typically, Samaritan's Purse is a little different because they have a lot of their own wherewithal, right? So the other ones they'll show up like in Selmer. There were going through and helping people. You know, they tear down the studs, they put the tarps on the roof. Sometimes they'll help actually re-roof a house. You know, they're out there, for them, it's a part of their ministry, right? It's, you know, they might help someone with a little bit of cash, but it's not a lot. They're just trying to serve in a tangible way. But they're definitely a part of it, right? So when we're trying to pay attention to what needs are out there, so we try to, and it's tough, right? Because we're not trying to take people's personally identifiable information, and there's always a tough balancing act of who needs help, who's getting help, and it's amazing. Some people will access every type of aid out there, and they may not come out ahead, but they're coming pretty close. And then other people, like, oh, I don't really need it. And so we try to find those people and say, hey, you're eligible for this, and we think you could use the help. But you know, part of that is we work with the communities, we work with those local organizations to go and find who might be missing. Like, there was a lot of contentious communication around FEMA right after we got this disaster declaration. And so people were reticent to register for FEMA help, the individual assistance programs. And so we went door to door in communities, and we partnered them up because of some of the discussion. We partnered them up with local law enforcement or county commissioners to take them around so that they would know that they're really federal agents, federal employees, state employees that are out there, just trying to make sure people were getting what they're eligible for. And yeah, it's tough.
Last question, Kim.
I know that you guys game plan, I'm sure, all the time, and for Tennessee, I'm sure you guys talk tornado all the time. We recently just haphazardly ended up circling through that area, like between Chattanooga and Knoxville, kind of over towards the North Carolina area, and it's gobsmacking. I mean, the damage still.
Oh,
as
yeah.
you just drive by, you're like, that is like unbelievable. But did you have like parked, you know, hurricane in the hollows of East Tennessee? I mean, was that on your bingo card? I mean, it just seems so like just out of the blue.
No, not that particularly. I have broad concerns around flash flooding in Appalachia, and so we were preparing for that. And yeah, so flash flooding has been a problem there, so for a long time. And for me, I was because I started my emergency management career in Ohio. They had the Shady Side flooding of 1990 or 91, which was an Appalachian community, and very similar topography, geography to what we see over there. You know, for us, most of the rain that caused our flooding fell in North Carolina. So like, we had winds and things like that going on our side of the mountains. But the headwaters of the Old Chucky, the French Broad, the Pigeon are all in North Carolina. And so their significant rainfall and the incredible, because it's not just Helene, it's the 5 days prior to Helene, just tremendous amounts of rainfall in those headwaters, coupled with then the significant rainfall from Helene is what drove this biblical level of flooding.
Thank you very much.